Thrilled to be here, and we've divided the talk into kind of chapter form because we kind of not really make rough cuts, but I just thought it was the best way to really organize the information. And where I want to start is in kind of one of those classic modes of Back to the Future, right? So our beloved Marty McFly and Crazy Doc, and I'm not sure who we all identify with at this time, but you know, I really wanted to make this participatory, but obviously with 200 or 300 people, whatever we have, that's very tough. So we're going to just call out some answers, and the first little Back to the Future moment is, who remembers what year this movie came out? Anyone? Yeah, 1985. I heard it out there. I was shocked. I thought it was even older than that, but that's a long time ago now, unbelievably. Anyway, the reason why I say Back to the Future is I feel like there's so much of what's happening in today's conversation about what we can do for early childhood that we were having back in 1985 and really back in the 70s, much to my surprise when I really looked back at how far back to the future we are. But anyway, let me just bring you back to the year 2000. Remember that long time ago, 13 long years ago, when the great expression was Y2K, right? And that was going to devour all of our PCs, which I wish it had devoured this PC, but it was going to devour all our PCs, and that whole big, millennium change was, a dramatic event, and that was 13 long years ago. And what were we doing 13 years ago? Well, we weren't talking about Facebook. The cloud was something that still existed in the sky. Tweets were sounds. Apps were what you sent into colleges. Skype was a typo. 4G was an apartment number or something. This all comes from an interview I saw with Tom Friedman on TV, and it was a great point about how much has changed since then. But around that time in the late 90s, there was, in kind of the mainstream media, in Time and Newsweek, they were showing images of the brain that looked like this, that showed really differences in young children's brains based on deprivation. And we began to really go, wow, there's really something we can see and feel like we know there are really different things happening for young children, because really up until that time, and maybe still to a certain extent today, we thought that early childhood period, well, whatever happens to them then, it's kind of a blank slate. They won't remember, they'll never talk about it. It really doesn't count until they, are 5 years old and start school and whatever. And in 2000, this seminal book, a nice big fat book, if any of you are looking for some good reading, came out from Neurons to Neighborhoods. And that really brought together all of the science at that time that we knew about early childhood development. And if you look at that book, it's incredibly current in terms of where we are, which on the one hand maybe says we haven't gone too far ahead of where we were, but really it was so groundbreaking. It saw the future and it tried to propel us forward, and I think we're struggling with the best ways to do that. So in 2000, when we talked about early childhood, the conversation was around these types of topics: the importance of the early years, missed opportunities, doing the right thing, the moral argument, brain development. And if we jump to today in 2013 and beyond, we talk about it a little differently today, right? We don't say brain development, we say brain architecture, because it's really something being built. We talk about the threats to that brain architecture in terms of toxic stress, which I'll just touch on for a moment tonight. We talk about disparities in development, which are clearly present before a child is even 2 years of age. We talk about economic impact, right? That's the argument we keep hearing today in terms of the president's proposal to do more investments in early childhood. The way that's being dissected is really about the economic issue around spending monies that way. We have military leaders talking about it as a national security issue, that our military of tomorrow is not going to be prepared because of problems, people not being eligible to be in the armed services because of lack of high school education, obesity, criminal backgrounds, etc. And that really, to solve that problem, you have to go back to early childhood. And then the term that's really taking over is executive function, that these are the most important skills for young children, and I'll talk more in detail about that. So I feel like we're really at a crossroads, and this crossroads has maybe been present for us many times in the past over the last few decades. Because believe it or not, in 1971, led by Senator Walter Mondale from Minnesota, who eventually became vice president under Jimmy Carter and the Democratic presidential nominee in 1984, legislation was passed by Congress to provide universal preschool in this country. And it passed overwhelmingly, bipartisan support, and it was vetoed by then President Nixon, because it was perceived that this could be a threat to the family, that this was big government telling us how to raise our children. So this issue about universal pre-K, and we heard the president's proposal last week about trying to get a lot more children into pre-K and more investments in early Head Start, et cetera. But this issue goes back 40 plus years now. So that crossroads, we're still there, and we're trying to decide which road we're going down. And I think that really sets a critical frame for the decisions we need to make. Okay, chapter 2, and this is very brief because I know ADF has spent a lot of time in these speaker series, the last 2 years, really focusing in on the importance of early childhood. So we don't need to do all that tonight. I know that you're, with the show of hands, people that were here at previous events, a lot of that's been covered. But I do want to highlight one or two brief pieces and present some new information. At least it was new to me. It's very current research, and I want to make sure that we spend just a couple minutes putting it out there for everybody. So remember, I'm saying the importance of early experience, not just the importance of early childhood, right? Because young children are having experiences in the world. And so we really need to be thinking about these early experiences as the smoking gun for all our troubles in terms of education and health, right? Where do we spend, in the public sector, where do we spend the majority of the money? We spend it for healthcare, and we spend it on education. And we can all debate about what we're getting in return for those investments. But a lot of the troubles that we're trying to overcome in the healthcare sector and in the education system go back to experiences that young children had early in their life, obviously. So really we think about those early experiences as getting under the skin, right? So things that happen to you early in life really get under your skin, and they're going to have a biological impact in how you grow and develop for the rest of your life. And that's really a major shift from that other notion of it really doesn't matter what happens in early childhood, they won't remember. So even if it's a bad, awful experience, they won't remember, so it's like it never happened. And we know now that that's really far, far from reality. Now the way we have to think about how it gets under your skin is through stress. And we can all think about in our lives today how your body responds to stress, right? You're gonna have increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased respirations, lots of other physiological responses that you don't even think about. Your body's just gonna do them, right? And so all of that is gonna be exactly what happens when a young child is feeling stressed. Now, you may say, well, how does a young child feel stressed? But quickly you remember, if you've been around a baby recently, children are very stressed, right? They come out, they're stressed, they're screaming, they're crying. That's how they're expressing their stress. And amazingly, their stress is been built to be as annoying as possible to you, so you respond to their stress, right? Because they cannot deal with their stress on their own. They need you. So when they're in a stressed moment and their alarm is going off, they need their adult caretakers, parents, grandparents, whomever, to come to them and help them deal with their stress. If they're hungry, to get them food. If they have a dirty diaper, to change their diaper. And if they're tired, to help them get to sleep, right? That's their stress situation. But for too many of our kids, they have this toxic stress, right? Stress that is unrelenting, unremitting. It's not something that I'm hungry, feed me, my stress is over, right? They're in very compromised environments that are very stressful. And because of the stress of the environment, the adults in their lives have trouble helping them deal with that stress. So maybe the parent doesn't respond to that crying baby appropriately. Maybe they misperceive why that baby's crying. And is that baby crying because they're hungry, or is that baby crying because they don't like me, or because of some other situation that they're blaming me for, or lots of other issues. But for a child in a toxically stressed environment where there's poverty, violence in the home, substance abuse issues, mental health issues, all of the above, pick your issue, right? These are situations that are unrelenting, and they're not just a bad day for a child, they are a chronic situation. Now, the way that stress is activated in your system is through the stress hormone cortisol. So cortisol is pumped into your body instantly in the moment of stress. I had plenty of cortisol here getting up in front of you, right? I had my cortisol burst, and I'm going to try and give you some cortisol burst by asking you to do some group participation in a few moments. But what happens when there is this cortisol burst in your system, right? There's lots of things that your body does to deal with the stress. But as it's busy dealing with the stress, other things get compromised in your system. So your immune system is suppressed, right? Which is why when You think about college-age kids in exam season, right? Lots of people start getting sick because they're stressed. Or if you're dealing with a chronic illness or someone in your family is dealing with a chronic illness, the doctor says you need to reduce the stress in your life because your immune system needs to use those resources to deal with the chronic health issue in your life. And it's harder to do that when your system is stressed. Reducing the number of cell connections in your brain, impairing your memory, right? So when you're stressed out and you're trying to remember something, so think back when you're studying for an exam and you're trying really hard to cram that information in and it's just not going in. Paying attention. Driving around Baton Rouge this afternoon, I was on the phone with Kirby and I said, "Where's the Starbucks?" And he answered the question and I said, "Okay, thanks." And I didn't remember that 2 seconds later because I was lost and stressed out in the moment. And impairs thinking and creates anxious behavior, right? When you're stressed out and you're nervous and you can't really focus and you're trying to deal with all the issues at hand. But think about all of those things in terms of being 2 years old or 3 years old. Or you're the kid in the child care center who comes from that chronically stressed environment and you have all these challenges and now you're asked to sit still, pay attention, during circle time or share toys or all of these things, but your system is kind of activated on a higher level of alert than other children. And while dealing with stress is normal and healthy and you need to be able to do it, you don't want to be that chronically stressed because now your body is almost permanently altering the amount of cortisol that's in your system. So this becomes your new normal. And just to close on in terms of the stress, think about the areas of the brain that are activated when you have anxiety or fear, right? And you see, hopefully you can see these circles. These are the areas of the brain that you use when you're anxious or fearful. And the next slide is going to be the areas of the brain that you use for memory and learning, right? So what we need children to be actively using in their brain to be doing well in school. And you see that the only thing that changed, going from the last slide to this slide, were the two words above the picture of the brain, right? You use the exact same areas of your brain to basically succeed in school as you're going to be using when you're anxious or fearful. But which one do you think overrides the other, right? If you're anxious or fearful, you're not going to be very good at using your memory or learning or all the things that we need to pay attention. So where this all goes is, okay, so now you're really stressed out. Well, what does that mean? Well, what we're finding out is that this word is going to become it's going to become part of the mainstream, I think, in the next couple of years. And I even saw a blurb using this word in the Times-Picayune today. Telomeres. Now, telomeres are a part of your DNA on each chromosome, right? So they're kind of the cap. And telomeres are long when you're young, and as the cells replicates and gets used, it gets shorter and shorter. And it's really the biological clock of the cell. So the cell is only going to replicate so many times before it dies. So it's really a process of aging. So the longer the telomere is, the younger the cell, the shorter the telomere is, the shorter the cell, and the closer it is to the time where it's no longer going to be used. So, so these telomeres are going to naturally shorten in the normal aging process, and when they get too short, the cell dies. That's what aging really is. So shorter telomere lengths in adults, though, are associated with higher risks for all sorts of common illnesses, right? Cardiovascular disease, diabetes, mental illness, various things, chronic health conditions, right, that as we age and we say, oh, why, when people get older, do they get certain illnesses? Well, some of it has to do with the normal aging process. Well, what we found is that cortisol speeds up that aging process. So literally, that stress, that activated stress response system that is being overly used is aging you prematurely, starting from very young age. So increased cortisol exposure has been found to reduce telomere length. And so, I don't know how many of you have heard of the ACEs study, right? Adverse Childhood Experiences. We have research that documented in thousands of people, 17,000 people in San Diego in a health maintenance organization. These were well-to-do people, middle and upper income, well-educated. And they went back and they asked them, how many adverse experiences did you have when you were a child? Things like being physically abused, sexually abused, having mental health issues in the home, someone from your home being incarcerated. You get the picture. And there was like 10 of those. And depending on your score, these were your ACEs score. So only a third of the people had none of these bad things that happened. 2/3 had at least one of these. But as the number increases, so does your possibility of having one of these diseases at a younger age. And when I first heard that, I was like, this is a stretch. How are you going to say having mental health issues in the home and being abused as a child, as awful as that is, and obviously that's not a positive experience, but how is that going to produce heart disease or lung disease or liver disease or any of these other things later in life? But all of a sudden you start to say, oh, there is a biological mechanism, right, that is literally prematurely aging you. So maybe you're going to have these things when you're 60 or 70, but now you have them when you're 40 or 50, partially attributed, maybe largely attributed, to the stress that you had in early childhood. Really powerful results, and I think we're going to see more and more about the significance of telomeres because we're only just beginning to learn how this impacts. So in the research in Romania, where children were randomly assigned to Romanian to remain in Romanian orphanages or assigned to foster care, the children who were assigned to foster care, who looked better on a number of indicators, also had longer telomeres at age 12 than the children who stayed in the orphanages. So really tremendous biological impact from the stress at that young age. Okay, so the last piece of this section is really to talk about executive function, because this is the term that is really the buzz right now. And there's a lot of jargon around executive function and what is working memory and inhibitory control. But I want you to think about it this way. Think of it as planning, reasoning, and problem solving, right? These are really core, key skills that we all need to function in our lives, in anything that we do. But it's the same thing when you're 3 and 4 and 5 years old. These skills are developing. Your executive function, we hope, is developing. And the importance of it is really dramatic. And I think the best way to get everyone to go, oh, I get what executive function is to do a little audience participation. So if you take out your pen or pencil, for those of you who have it, and what I'm going to do, now this is a task that a 4-year-old, 4.5-year-old can do. So lower the cortisol level, everyone's going to be able to do it. So I'm going to tap my pen once, somehow try and do it so everyone can hear me. Let's just test. So can you hear this? Yeah, you can hear that. So I'm going to tap my pen once on this blasted PC, and you're going to tap your pen twice. I'm going to tap my pen twice. You're going to tap it once. Now, I might not do it in that order, but that's the game, right? I go 1, you go 2, I go 2, you go 1. Okay? Everybody ready? Everyone's ready. Here we go. Very good, right? We could all do that. We're all passing executive function at the age of 4.5. But you see that who had to think about that when they were doing it, right? It was something that you had to. I saw that, I was in your chair, right? And I saw a psychologist do that, and I was like, that is fabulous. We're going to do that at every presentation. You had to think about that, right? You had to inhibit what was your natural response, which was really to mimic me, and remember the rule that I had explained. Very simple, right? So think about how that applies to a child learning the alphabet. What happens when we teach them about the letter C, right? C sounds like a K, and sometimes it sounds like an S. And the word tail, which is a common word for children, the tail of an animal or a fairy tale, those are 2 different words that sound exactly alike but have totally different meanings. And numbers, right? A 0 means one thing when we put up the 0, but it means something very different when it follows another digit. So that's constantly what learning is, right? Remember this, but now we're changing the rules a little bit, and sometimes it's this and sometimes it's that, and you have to manage all of that in what they call it an air traffic controller, right? There's all this stuff going on out there. You think you know the rules of the game, but really it's constantly changing. And that's what children are dealing with all the time. And the more executive function they have, the more they're able to deal with that. So we're going to do one more, just hopefully colors come out here. I'm going to put up a word here, and you're going to tell me what the color of the word is. And I know it's a little difficult because the colors wash out here a little bit, but you're going to just call out the color of the word. Exactly. Well done. Okay, so that's executive function. But now, this is why we're talking about executive function. Now that you clearly know what it is, there's also the issue of how this is really the most critical skills for young children to learn, right? So while we're all really focused on literacy and vocabulary and all of these things, that is important. But what's more important, the research is telling us, is executive function, and really breaking that down to paying attention and being able to control yourself. So executive function abilities predict academic and social readiness for school over and above intelligence and any prior academic knowledge. So 3 studies just to highlight. One that came out last year. This is from 14,000 children across the country in both public and private settings. And they looked at attention scored by, I believe it was the kindergarten teacher and parent report. So attention meaning attentiveness, task persistence, eagerness to learn, independence, flexibility, organization, right? So all of these executive function skills. And what they found was that attention problems were more predictive of gaps in test scores on reading and math than aggressive behavior, which gets much more attention, right? The aggressive child gets a lot of attention from us. Socioeconomic status, race, gender, all of those things had smaller impacts in predicting gaps in test scores than did attention problems. And the bigger issue is in classrooms where children had attention problems, the scores of all kids suffered. Whereas the classrooms that had kids with aggression problems, that child's scores suffered, but not all the other kids. And it was 7% and 8% in terms of math and reading. Okay, another study, looking at attention of children when age 4 and then going out to their age 25. And the attention span persistence at age 4 was a significant predictor of college completion at age 25. Reading or math at age 7 or 21 had no predictive validity on college completion by age 25. So your ability to read at age 7 or 21 was not the factor. Your ability to pay attention, be flexible, deal with the contradictions of the world, those were the factors that showed whether or not you were going to be able to succeed in our educational system. And one more, this is from the National Academy of Sciences, came out in 2011. This looked at thousands of children in New Zealand and I can't remember if it was thousands or hundreds of children in the United Kingdom. And what it showed, they looked at reports of children's attention, their executive function skills at age 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. Okay, so throughout their whole childhood. And then based on those scores at all those times, kids, they got a score basically from 1 to 5. And as their scores improved, so did their health, right? So basically the low scores on the left, you had a lot more health problems at age 32, right? Premature aging, compared to the ones that were scoring 4s and 5s. Substance abuse, again, you see this almost linear relationship. Your ability to hold a job and earn higher income, again, the same kind of linear relationship. Crime, you have almost 45% of the people in the lowest category having a criminal conviction compared to just over 10% in the highest category. And then those children growing up and becoming single parents. Again, very similar type of relationship. Almost 60% of the group that was not able to have good self-discipline, if you will, executive function throughout their childhood compared to the ones who scored in the highest group. Okay, and so again, what are the active ingredients in early experience? It's all about relationship, right? This is how children experience the world. This is the critical factor, right? In real estate, it's location, location, location. For children, it's relationship, relationship, relationship. Secure relationships, it's not just an emotional issue, like we want all our kids to have a good emotional bond with their parents. It's a biochemical issue, and it's very protective of the stress in children's life. So when we talk about children who pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and overcame all great odds, if you look closely, you will probably see at least one, if not more, very supportive adults in their lives that help them be the resilient people that they are. So as we close this section and get into the meat of the report that Kirby and I did, I leave you with this number, another participatory moment, opportunity for everyone. Anyone have a guess of what 1826 means? It's not a year. Here's your clue. This is the window of opportunity. That's the number of days until the 5th birthday from the time a child is born. 1,826 days. That's our time to build that the fundamentals, that strong base that children need. Okay, turning chapter 3, risk and reach. So, and everyone can download this report. I'll show you the website afterwards. But we put out this risk and reach report, and this was all designed, how many people are familiar with the Kids Count data book? Well, not as many as I thought, or people aren't admitting, but there's a national report that comes out every year from the Annie E. Casey Foundation, and Agenda for Children is the state grantee here in Louisiana, and it documents how child well-being in the state compared to every other state. And for 20 plus years running, we were 49th. One year we were 50th, but so 49th or 50th for 20 years. Last year they changed the methodology a little bit. They added some measures. We bumped up to 47th, which was great. But we know that we're always at the bottom of the list, right? And that's very frustrating and disempowering and awful to hear. But the reality is that just saying Louisiana is doing this terribly for our children doesn't really give us a picture of what's going on in our communities, because we know it's not equally as bad everywhere in the state. And that probably everywhere in the state has strengths, just as every good place in the state might have some weaknesses too. And we wanted to know more information specifically about children 0 to 5 as opposed to children 0 to 18. So the risk report was all about documenting risk for our kids just looking within Louisiana, so parish to parish, and then how do the programs, the large programs that we have to serve young children, how are those doing in comparison to where the risk is in the state? So these were the 11 risk factors that we looked at. So each individual risk factor is documented in the book, and then together they form a composite risk score. So what I want you to notice on these maps, because we're not going to look at each map, but we're going to flash through them, is how the dark colors change, right? So dark colors are bad. So each indicator is broken down into 4 categories: low, low moderate, moderate high, and high. So the darkest color is the highest group, and each, as the shades get lighter, that's better. So what I want you to see is just how the colors change as we scroll through the 11 maps. Oh, and just for those who are challenged, this is where we are in the state right now. Okay, and then so based on those 11, we get this overall score. So we have certainly areas that struggle, and they're probably not a big surprise. But again, we wanted to put it in a context of not everyone is struggling as equally, and as we'll detail, everybody has strengths to work from. So again, just to highlight your area here, this is how I'm assuming almost everyone in this room is from one of these parishes. So I figured, save you the time of asking the question, we'll just put up a nice little map for you here.